You are listening to the AMODA'S podcast. In this series, Amoda explores her essential teaching through conversation and excerpts from interviews and events. To find out more about events and to sign up for her newsletter, go to www.amoda'S.com. Please subscribe, comment and share if this podcast moves you. And if you feel called to donate, please go to the website. Thanks for listening, and we hope you enjoy. Greetings, everyone, and welcome back to another podcast with AMODA'S. Hello, Amoda.
Hello, Kavi.
So it's been a while, and we have put out a couple of podcasts where Amoda was interviewed on somebody else's show, and that kind of caused attention to today's podcast here with me, Kavi. I just want to make sure that those who are listening know that this is an unusual conversation between Amoda and myself. It's not an interview. I'm not interviewing her. For the interviews, she goes to people who actually are good at interviewing. I'm not actually very good at interviewing, but I am pretty good at having a conversation with my wife, who is also a spiritual teacher. And these are much more kind of informal inquiries, investigations, where I can prod and poke around, and we can just sort of, between the two of us, see what arises. I try and defer as much as possible to Amoda because most people are more interested in her than me. But occasionally I feel called just to contribute in some kind of way. So if that offends you, I'm sorry. And if it doesn't offend you, fantastic. Let's keep going. So having said that proviso, here we are. Welcome back to another podcast with AMODA'S. Today, we're going to improvise this particular kind of exploration, loosely entitled AMODA'S Travels in India. Yeah, it's not really just a story about AMODA'S travels in India, but there are many spiritual seekers and spiritual teachers who either have been to India or seek to go to India, or have had a good experience or a bad experience, or whatever, in India. So it's an opportunity just to kind of explore the uniqueness, in a way, of the India experience as it arose for you, Amoda. I know I had an experience. I had my experience in India, and it is a very unique place, and it does something very special. It's my observation. So I'd like to kind of explore that a little bit, if possible. Yeah, we're not just talking about the Taj Mahal and the sites that have been seen, or the Goa scene or anything. So it's hopefully a little bit deeper than that. Yeah. Amoda, let's just start this. When did you first go to India, and why? If you choose to start at an entirely different place, that's okay as well.
The first time I went to India was, I think, 1992. Why I went, I have no idea. Well, I have some idea, but it wasn't a grandiose idea. I visited India several times after that, I think. And then I'll skip very quickly to the primary time in India in 1996, partly because that's the one that holds the most meaning and the most teaching to me, personal growth for myself, and also the one that I remember. I don't really remember much of the previous ones. Yeah.
You also remember the ones that we did together.
Well, that's after 1996,
Yeah,
quite some time after 1996.
Sure, yeah.
So from that point on, so we can start there if you want.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about that.
1996, I went for a specific reason, and I went for some time. I can't remember. It wasn't a long time, but it was several months at least. I went with the distinct purpose or intention of, should I say, finding myself. Finding myself in the sense of having been very embroiled in a turbulent, intense relationship that I both never wanted to leave and totally wanted to leave at the same time. Remember, I'm still in my 30s then, early mid-30s, so still very much on a path of self-discovery. I felt that being that far away from the relationship would allow me to discover something about myself that I wasn't able to in a codependent, entangled relationship. That's one reason. Well, that's the primary reason. I did go directly to Pune, to Osho's ashram. He had just left his body a year or so prior to that, maybe 2 years. I had been introduced to the ashram in Pune several years prior to that, but only for a very short period of time, where I tried some of the active meditations and very much felt resonant with that, although a little bit overwhelmed by the vibration somehow, the teachings, the satsangs which were recorded, but left me partly feeling like I was being brainwashed, only in the sense that I couldn't make sense of what was being said. But I did very much resonate with some of the meditations. Anyway, so I touched on it, got a feeling for it, and thought, well, maybe I'll just give myself to this. There's a lot I don't know, but it seems like a space where I can just go and find something out about myself. And that's where I went.
What did you think did you have any more distinction than finding out something about myself? What is that? What's that mean?
I just had to be away from my relationship at the time.
So it was as much moving away from as moving towards something. It was.
Yes. I knew that I sort of had a sense that by traveling on my own in that way, which I had not done before, by going to India, that I'd been to India several times, but for very short periods of time, a few weeks, and with my relationship. And not to any sort of spiritual center, if you like, which was an opening in itself, but a different kind of opening. So I sort of got a sense that by being on my own, traveling and exploring and sort of following my own impulse, making my own choices, being away from my usual environment, and being in an environment where meditation was at the core of it, and not just sitting silent meditation. I'd done a lot of that. I'd gone to Buddhist monasteries all around England at various times and immersed myself in that. So I was very familiar with meditation in that sense, but this was much more eclectic, much more, as everyone knows now, all the active meditations, and then there's the tantric meditations, and there's all sorts that we don't know about until we go there and dive in. I just got a sense I'd find something else, find out who I am. I don't mean in some, non-dual sense, or that's not what I was following at the time, but just find out who I am as a person, what I want, what I'm following. I don't know, just who I am outside of a relationship.
Was the relationship, were you in crisis at this point?
Very difficult to say, because if you mean chaos by crisis, that was from the day one. Truthfully, that was from the moment we met. I don't particularly want to go into specifics here, but it had that quality. And perhaps now I would simply walk away from that. Well, definitely. But at the time I was both drawn to it, yes, and repulsed by it, or repelled by it. But, again, just to put it into context, it was one of the most powerful episodes of my life. Yeah, 10 years it lasted. And as you know, Kavi, you're familiar with that relationship because you were around then as well. Yes, just for everybody who's listening, I know the man in question. He was actually pivotal in a strange way, not strange way, in introducing Amoda and I to each other, because he was the producer of the rock and roll band that I was in, as well as being Amoda's husband. And years before anything happened between Amoda and I, even before we were working together, I was aware, even on the very periphery, of the volatile nature of this relationship between these two beings who I really didn't know very well. I knew John, actually, the husband, more than I knew Amoda at all. But I heard tales, and it was, it was pretty volatile. He was a wild and beautiful and unique and eccentric guy. Yes,
so
in the music world, such a talented genius. I loved him. So we're not.
He was a beautiful guy. He still is.
Yeah. Both of us were much younger than we are now. Both of us had much to learn, and our personalities or our energies were in some ways opposites. The opposites pulled us together, and the opposites pulled us apart. And so it was a journey where I learned a lot.
Yes.
About relationship, about myself, about all sorts of things. So anyway, it was necessary. But at that point, which was kind of halfway through the 10-year mark, it was high and low all the time.
Yeah.
So I don't know what happened, but there was a sense that I had to just leave. I mean, we weren't living together at that time. We did have very independent lives on that level, so it was quite unconventional anyway. But it just felt, something called me, something had to. So I went to India.
So then, okay, yeah. So I get that. I think we get that. What then transpired?
In a nutshell, what I came face to face with when I say I had a sense that I was going to discover something about myself or find myself, what I faced immediately and as an ongoing theme, perhaps, was fear. Fear of being alone, fear of being with others.
The two great fears.
Just fear. Fear of being myself, whatever that means, fear of being seen, fear of being unseen. So fear became a big thing. And so that was a kind of running theme. What actually transpired on a sort of circumstantial level was that I spent some time at the ashram in what we might call psychodynamic groups. Yeah. primal therapy, this therapy, that therapy, groups where you face yourself, expose yourself, breath work, tantric work, primal work, all sorts.
Yeah, the dynamic work,
energy work. Fabulous stuff. Not that I was totally unfamiliar with it, but this took it to another level. Also, on a circumstantial level, I had to find my way through the maze of India, finding somewhere to live, finding a way of feeding myself. I didn't have that many resources. Finding a way of just managing my time, finding a way of managing the approach of the opposite sex, which happens a lot, especially when you're younger, and in that environment, and managing that, finding my way through that, learning where I had, in some ways, been codependent, unable to say no, or unable to say yes, or following my own inner impulse rather than someone else's. All of this was very valuable. And I also find myself leaving the ashram. I can't remember why, but again, conglomeration of things. I ended up quite a long way away on a beach, totally on my own. I was meant to be with other people, somebody I'd met, a girlfriend, but for some reason she went off somewhere else. As in India, you just kind of follow your own flow.
Yeah,
everyone does.
Gotcha.
This was particularly poignant to me. I ended up on a beach, it was a deserted beach actually, in a very small hut, very, very primitive, which I'd experienced before, but night, complete dark, sea, nobody around, and yet there's a fishing village somewhere, totally on my own. I ended up there for quite some time. I can't remember, a couple of weeks or something. And I learned, I faced the fear of being alone. I mean, totally alone. Sitting on a beach at night, totally dark, alone, or first thing in the morning. And it was a fear that I hadn't faced before. And, the fear of being, very much the fear of the unknown. Unknown country, unknown environment, unknown circumstances. There was a great nakedness in that I didn't know. I wasn't doing it consciously. That's just where I happened to be. It was only when I left after a couple of weeks and took the bus back to the ashram that when I entered the ashram, it's more like a little township, if you like, I had a very different sense of myself. I think that was one of the first major experiential energy, an experiential energy of surrender. I surrendered to that unknown. I surrendered to the aloneness, and a whole kind of burden that I didn't know I was carrying, but had some vague sense of fear fell away. Fear of my survival, fear of being seen, fear of not being seen and not being taken care of, fear of being invaded, fear of being left alone and abandoned. It's like it all came undone. And I was able to enter the ashram and somehow be in my own flow completely. So all yeses and nos, all natural impulses to go here, do this, be still, just arose very naturally. So it was a great naturalness. And it's from that point on that I was really able to be totally present and naked, sometimes literally, in the meditations, not concerned with any need for acceptance or approval from the group. Yeah, because there are many groups and cliques and so on, like there is in any culture. I was totally in my own zone. And that was beautiful. That was the first time I think I'd experienced that. And it led to, I think, and again, this is all in retrospect. I couldn't have described it this way at the time. It's how I experienced it after that. It sort of led to a very seamless experience throughout the next few months. It was just seamless. It's like one eternal unfolding. And some of the meditations were sublime. It's like this, there was definitely a sort of energy that was coiling up my spine, and it was just beautiful. And then there was one time where I was walking quite early in the morning down a street, a back street, not in the ashram, but out on the streets. And I think I was feeling very expanded, but also very natural. And these children, these Indian children, some of them beggar children, I don't think they were beggar children. They were just playing in the streets. And all the way down the street came up to me and touched my third eye. And I was like, wow, this is strange. And I think there must have been a beam of light coming out of my third eye. That's what it felt like, this golden light. And that actually stayed with me. What stayed was this sort of point right here. And as if I was actually located there. And from that point, it's like I could watch everything. And I wasn't limited to this, and all concern for the self had sort of gone. There was just this very expanded view of everything, and a still point. It was very still. And that was actually quite close to the end of my time there. I'll jump to the flight back to London. On the flight back to London, of course, the chaos and the activity of catching a flight, packing bags
from India,
from this expanded. This was like shortly after this, back to London. And then as you land, this sense of coming back to a very linear 3D reality.
If anybody has ever done that, you'll know what that means, because there's an innate, regardless of what you're talking about, whether it's like the ocean or the sky, and then you sort of, and everything's totally different. All the shapes are round, for instance, over there. Everything's soft and round, and then you get back into the Western world, and it's all square and tight, and it's like self. It's
you feel that anyway, really, coming back from somewhere like that. But this was
on a
1,000-fold exacerbated because of this sort of consciousness point here. But the thing is, I didn't feel like I went back down. I stayed there effortlessly. So it all appeared like a dream that was just unfolding. And when I got back to my apartment in London, there was still this. And even when I met again with my husband, it was still this. And it's almost like, in a most beautiful way, nothing mattered.
Right. So you saw it. You saw it as the dream, samsara, in a sense.
I saw it. Yes. And even though I re-entered samsara and the relationship took its usual course of ups and downs, which it did. Sometimes it was exquisite, sort of ecstatic in some way, and then it would tumble into hell. Yeah. Even when it did that, there was still this, and it was untouched. Now, I don't say that's awakening. That is not enlightenment or awakening. That did not happen for many years later. But I did know it was a kind of expanded state of consciousness, or a glimpse of something, which actually sort of dislocated me in a good way from the tight limitation of being totally caught up in the dream. So it was a kind of meditative state or expanded state of consciousness, and the meditations continued in that way.
And can I do you mind if I ask?
Sure.
You had already had like experiences of psychedelics, so you were familiar with the environment of transcendence, let's just for want of a better term. So it's like that.
Yes,
but in a different way. Yeah, that's what I'm hearing you kind of talk about.
Yes, I would say it was another, if you like, stage of the same kind of experience. Yeah, the first experience being in the psychedelic realm, LSD, even ketamine that can be, give you a glimpse of non-locatable consciousness. Yeah, not limited to this boundary of body, of mind, of self. And that happens in an instant. It can happen in an instant through the psychedelic experience. This was really much the same without the flashing lights, if you like, without the fireworks, but catalyzed by an actual in-body experience of being in, an environment. Yeah. On the beach, in the ashram, on a plane in India, with other people, on my own, and so on and so on. So it was more embodied. Yeah, it was sort of transcendent but embodied. So that was definitely, in some ways, an evolution of that original glimpse that took place through psychedelics and through long distance running. That was also a glimpse. So yes. So that was pretty profound and very much something that set me on a different course.
I mean, if you were listening to that, you from a certain perspective, you say, well, this is a Kundalini experience, where they ended up not at the crown, but at the third eye. And once the third eye connection had arisen, it kind of never went away. I mean, I have no idea whether that's Kundalini or not, but there's definitely a movement, a shift of energy, but also there's something latent within you, I think, that, that allowed that to happen kind of relatively easily, in a sense.
Yes, I think it was Kundalini. I mean, Kundalini is simply a release and a movement of energy from the limited to the unlimited. But yes, this was very much that, because when I came back to London and I would just sit, and whereas prior to going to India, my meditation practice was meditation practice. You sit, you get into the posture, you breathe, you count, and you remain as the witness, and so on. This was just, I sat, and immediately I wasn't there. And I experienced movement in the spine that would, and that would be bliss. And there was no trying, and this went on. And so it would be an hour later, and I'd be like, I'm still here. So there was no meditation practice, really. It just happened spontaneously. It did sort of, if you like, sort of fade away or kind of integrate after a few months, but it was a 2 or 3 period month period where it was actually I didn't speak to anyone about this. I didn't tell anyone. This was just my private experience. I didn't make a big deal of it. It's just what was happening. It was lovely.
Did it change? Did John, your husband, did he notice, or did it have an impact on the next wave? Because you said that was after about 5 years and your relationship lasted about 10 years. So we're talking about an experience at a pivotal point halfway through. Was it? I mean, I know you don't want to talk particularly about relationship, but why not?
He noticed initially that there was a glow, if you like. I can't say that I could share the depth of that experience with him. He that wasn't his realm.
Yeah.
Or the conversations we were having. So it sort of had a nice effect for a short while. And then we tumbled into hell again. Yeah. Yeah. Something like that, anyway.
Yes. Yeah, I thought that was what you were going to say.
We stumbled along in and out of things for a few more years after that. Maybe 2 or 3 years, I can't remember, but there was a few more challenging years until it was it was obvious. Well, it wasn't obvious. It sort of happened by itself that we had to part very suddenly. It wasn't containable anymore. That density of the hell realm was not containable anymore for me. But I didn't make a decision. It was just an energetic thing where it was not sustainable. It just couldn't keep itself together because something was taking place here that, and maybe for him in his own way, but not in this way, but his own growth had to take him in whatever direction it took him in. But we definitely had to part at some point. We just
So okay, yeah. So what the question in a way is which something was liberated for you in that experience in India, but it was India and the ashram. Osho's the experience of actually being in that. It wasn't just India; it was actually two environments, both within each other, because India, in the circumstance that you're talking about, would or might have a profound effect anyway. But that in the context of the dynamic or liberating, because everything that you kind of talked about is are all consequences or actions that are fostered and were encouraged, or not encouraged, but that's where Osho's meditations, much as Osho being the kind of controversial figure that people talk about, I'm not interested in that kind of stuff, because those meditations were and are extremely focused.
Yes, especially if you're doing them 5 times a day, every day for months on end.
They're gonna shake something up.
There was definitely
they're gonna do something,
an impact, And there's a last little piece, since we're talking about that, of the ashram before I got on the plane. The very last piece was that, if you like, from that perspective that we're speaking of, or that I had experienced and described to some extent, the very day before the flight back, which was already booked, so I had to leave, the very day before, as I was kind of just finishing, if you like, business at the ashram, saying, okay, goodbye, I'm not doing any more meditations, I'm packing, I'm leaving, okay, that's fine. That very evening was sannyas evening with the naming ceremony. And I had no intention of being part of that. A, it was too close to my leaving time. B, I hadn't really considered it. And, other people were doing it. And I tend not to follow what other people are doing. I almost
you're
like
a
to do the
loner.
opposite.
Amoda, you are a loner.
Yeah, so
there is no two ways about this.
I wanted to find my own flow. If everyone's going to go to the naming ceremony, then I'm likely to go somewhere else.
I'm going in the other direction.
Yeah. So, but something pulled me. Something at the very last minute, and I had learned, or that's what was happening. I was following the inner impulse, even though the mind might say, don't go or do go. And I had no idea. I hadn't witnessed a sannyas ceremony. I'd only heard about it. And so I found myself sitting there. And of course, I won't go into the details, but I ended up, yes, with the third eye business. And then walking out with a certificate with a new name, which I couldn't even read.
Which you couldn't even read it.
I couldn't understand it. And suddenly there's this name on Amoda, which I'd never heard and sounded very weird and didn't sound very Indian or Sanskrit or spiritual, but actually is Sanskrit. And it completely it sort of went through another layer of undoing something. I kind of didn't know who I was. I thought, well, am I whatever my name was then, or which has a whole baggage of identity and history, or am I this, which is completely unknown, and what is it? And or am I, or none of it? What does it matter? It's just a name. So I decided to kind of take it as an experiment. A, what does it matter what you're called? B, what does it matter what it means? And C, what happens if you drop the baggage of your inherited identity that comes with a name that many people don't examine? So it was a kind of psychological experiment to me, rather than taking on a spiritual name, because it didn't seem spiritual to me. Amoda, if anything, sounds like fashion. In Italian, moda, la moda, is fashion. So that's all I knew. That I'm not Italian, but my stepfather is Italian. So I was like, this is strange. So it wasn't spiritual to me, but until I discovered what it meant. And that's very nice.
And it means
joy.
Yeah, it means life of joy.
It means living a joyous life. Amoda ma jivan, or jivan ma Amoda, I think, or ma jivan Amoda is the right.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
I played around with that just to make it fit in, but which also had an impact, because I actually had been quite prone to melancholy and maybe not depression at that point. That had passed, but I was with a tendency towards melancholy, not joyousness, or at least I didn't think I did. That's not how I experienced myself as joyous. So it was like this was a new kind of vibration. Anyway, I took it, and that evening, I was the sannyas celebration that follows the sannyas ceremony, which is basically one big party, but it's it's not hedonistic party. It's a celebratory party.
Very light and celebratory.
It's very light, yeah. Joyous. Yeah. But I went totally alone, utterly alone. Again, it was quite far out from the ashram, and it was on a rooftop, and I went in totally alone. But in that aloneness, I was totally free and also all one. I didn't feel the need to speak to anyone. I didn't feel the need to be, approved of or belong anywhere or included. I didn't have a single drink. And it was just, again, a very ecstatic experience, naturally. And I think how that was experienced, I felt like I'd merged into unconditional love, which wasn't from anyone, but I really felt Osho. I hadn't met him in the body. I'd absorbed his teachings, which by then were not so gobbledygook, but still it sort of bypasses the mind. I felt that it was one and the same. Yeah. Not that I am Osho as a personhood, but the essence of Osho and the essence of this are one and the same. And in that, there's a wholeness, a completeness. And it's from that point on that the path of surrender, or the path of unconditionality, naturally unfolded. I didn't choose or set out that way to do that, to practice that. It just became an energetic field that had a resonance, a rippling effect throughout my life. So from that point on, the next morning on the flight to London, and then the ups and downs of the relationship, from that point on, all there was that. It was ongoing unconditionality, ongoing undoing of resistance, until that allowed, although it was quite dramatic at the time, allowed the limitations of that relationship and my identity within that relationship to come undone. So it was quite dramatic on a personal level, because it hurt a lot, a lot.
Oh dear. Oh dear.
But on a truer level, it was a natural unfolding of this ongoing unconditionality to what is, which is liberation. So it was,
extraordinary. It's so extraordinary in so many. I know all about you. I know the story so much, but each time you tell it, it's got another fragrance of depth where I see you, and it's quite exquisite. I must admit, is to listen to how it is, because I know your story, and I know what you were like before, even though I didn't know you. I knew what you were like when, and a very concealed person, I wouldn't shut down, but obviously with a, really pretty closed in, and muted. The muted person in a sense, with that light that is just so vibrant within you and shining from you now, that there's, and then you kind of talk about the name of joy, because by the time, I met you in the early 2000s, and I knew you now. I only ever experienced you as joy, not joy with a cause, but joy as an innateness. It was like you introduced me to the beauty of joy for no reason, not as a theory or a philosophy or anything, but actually as in the inherent nature of us. Wow. And I was like, really? I had no idea. I thought we were screwed up, sort of dysfunctional at our heart. But that, and so what I hear is that whole movement, that your life is a movement, isn't it? A wave, that was absolutely necessary for you to go through that.
It was the precursor. It was the preparation. Yeah, not knowing that, but it was definitely seemingly the precursor or the preparation for the unexpected. Everything's unexpected. I didn't expect any of that, but unpremeditated, practiced, unexpected liberation from the core structure of separate self. Yeah, once again, the main pin. Yeah, this was all happening, if you like, as a preparation from the periphery coming closer to the main pin. Yeah, the periphery being the relationship, my personality, how I was with groups, how I was with being alone, traveling. This is all on the periphery, if you like. And it got seemingly closer and closer to the main pin, which was catalyzed by that ending of that relationship, which then catapulted me into another layer of aloneness, of an existential aloneness. Again, not to do with circumstance, but existential. And then after a couple of years, unexpectedly, that main pin came undone. And that's liberation from the me identity that is a separate self. And then from that point on, as you know, and we've spoken about, so I won't go on about it, there is no more problem or concern for the personhood. No more trying to fix it or have a better life or have a better relationship. And in fact, no relationship. Fantastic, because everything is
until
one.
I came along.
And well, you appeared in that field, yes. Shortly after that, a year or two after, but maybe about a year after that.
We've never really, either of us have thought about this as a relationship in a sense, have we? Now you think about it. I've never thought about myself as having a relationship with you.
No, from that point on, that wasn't having a relationship. That was another appearance in the one, seemingly dancing as two, almost for a purpose. Yeah. Not a purpose, a conscious purpose of I'm going to have a special relationship or do something special in the world, but it had its own creative or energetic field, frequency field that's it's been growing, or if you like, refining itself for many years, but it's been moving through us. And that's not the same as having a relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah. So again, we've spoken about this many times. No codependency, no need, no blah, blah.
When I used to hang around with the shamanic guy, the woman who was co-teaching with him was saying something about when love calls or something. When love calls, there's the trumpet sound over the other side of the universe. Something is started in motion. And when you speak to me about these sorts of things, I feel like, whatever happened to you in this crazy life that we live, it called me. And I had to completely, leave my entire life, really. And I came charging across the universe in order to die, in in front of you, so that I could just be of service in this that is you, ultimately, as and I know how weird that sounds, but honestly, in my heart of hearts, I feel that very, very strongly. Yes. And the more I listen to you, and I loved this phase that we're in of you talking about kind of what's led to this, because I think that people, see a human being who's also having, is an extraordinary teacher in many ways, and what's contributed to that, because you can't say what has caused anything, but everything is a contributory factor, isn't it? You didn't plan, like you said, you went to India to get away from, to get some space, to try and to sort of find yourself, but you didn't find yourself. You got closer to losing yourself.
That's right. It did bring me closer to losing myself in the most beautiful way. And I think, yes, I think these conversations are, well, they're both sort of interesting or fun for us to flow into. And, perhaps, and the feedback we get from those who follow us, who follow the teachings, who are immersed in the teachings, is valuable in that, most spiritual teachers, traditional and even contemporary, have a persona, have a facade, and only certain bits of the story are presented. And there's a kind of mythology around it, partly to do with privacy. I mean, why should anyone know your private life and your background? We don't have to share everything. And that's great. Why not? But somehow, perhaps because of the two of us, we're compelled to share some of that. And I think that brings both a humanity. Sometimes it's misunderstood and they go, oh, well, you're not a spiritual teacher. You're not liberated, as you say you are, or as you present yourself. And that's rubbish as well. There is a very ordinary or extraordinary, as we each are, unique individual here who hasn't come through the traditional path of being born on a lotus flower or having gone through, some, 10,000 years of Buddhist practice or whatever. Some of us don't have to. Yeah. When I entered Buddhism, not as a teaching, but as a meditation practice, it was so familiar to me. It was like 1,000 lifetimes of meditation. In fact, one of the first things that happened in Pune, in the ashram, when I went there, and I met I don't know what she was, a psychic or somebody, a channeler. She put her hands on my body, and one of the first things she said was, you don't need to meditate. You don't need to learn meditation. Yes, you'll enjoy it, but you've meditated for thousands of lifetimes. You've come here to learn to be embodied, to be human. Yeah, and so on and so on. So liberation is both being human, but not being identified.
Yes, I can see how that is. I can see how that is, because I think also on the, not just on the transcendent level, but also on the human dysfunctional level, that there was a tendency in your life to dissociate, to be like this, and therefore to avoid the human experience with all of its depth and its, pain and suffering and anguish and all that kind of stuff. And so, and so ironically, as she said, the channeler, your job is to do exactly what it's turned out that you're doing in life, which is to speak to the human experience. It's like obviously the other has to be spoken to as well, the context, because it's not just whatever, but it's
so paradoxical, isn't it? Because even as you say that, I'm actually not interested in the human experience, not because I'm bypassing or dissociating, but it's circumstantial. Human experience is circumstantial. It comes and goes. So, in that sense, it's whatever, but there's also a movement of seeming kind of purpose, something. Yeah, it's not like whatever, and there's a kind of laziness or giving up of responsibility or just being messy. Not at all. But
on the other hand, it's not the spirituality that denies the human experience. When we say human experience, we don't really mean the human experience in a sense, do we? We just mean that it's here all the time.
Yeah, we don't mean the human experience in terms of the obsession with self or identity or possessions or acquisitions and what that means about me and success and failure, or the unconsciousness of reactivity and relationships based on the unconscious state and the battle of that. No, we're not interested in that. That's gone, long gone. There's nothing of that here, but simply the human experience of what is. Yeah. You stick a pin in my hand. Ouch. Basically, my dog dies. Ouch.
All right.
So
I've just that on that. It's very much the Promethean myth of bringing the fire of, in this case, enlightenment into human consciousness.
Yes.
Yeah.
Being that's all. In the world, but not of the world.
Yeah.
Which is totally and utterly Osho, which is totally and utterly Jesus.
Yeah. So look, we I think we might have to draw this episode to a conclusion.
It's sort of some of India, isn't it? Not all of India.
Well, we haven't even talked about southern India. I mean, when I was just thinking about the experience that we had when we ended up in Arunachala, we ended up in Tiruvannamalai, we ended up at Ramana's, Yeah, we ended up teaching in southern India, we went up Arunachala one day, which is it's just a mind blowing. And also, my experience of India was very different to yours, and but in a way had the same kind of effect, because it just tore my English sensibility apart. I mean, almost as we landed in the plane. We got through the airport and I was just toast, wasn't I? Because it forced me to surrender, and I didn't want to surrender anything, And
I think we can just say that about India. If you're available, if there's something available in you for the ruthless invitation of surrender, then it's going to happen. Whether it means that you have to stand in the line waiting to get through passport control, and you have to surrender in patience and just be there, and be there in presence and okayness, then it will do that. And if you're not available for that, then most probably the India experience will be rather unsavory or uncomfortable
or repel
spit you out, and you'll leave, unless you do the total tourist thing. We're not talking about the tourist thing. We're talking about India. Yeah. And that was some time ago. I don't know what it's like now. I mean, who knows?
Yes, I know all of those qualities that were alive in me, the indignity of it, the impatience of it, the
rightness of it. Yes.
Of it. Yeah.
It has to be ordered. Yes. We are in line. So this person's first, and and this, but no. It's much more chaotic than that.
It's almost, honestly, just kind of wrapping up. My experience very quickly was that there was some strange intelligence in India itself that knows who everybody is, and it knows how much you're holding on to whatever vestige of self you've got, and it's going to come along, and it's got your number, and it's going to push your button, and it will push and push and push and push, and then you either leave or you stay. And you can stay and fight, and a lot of people do stay and fight, or keep, this is just my experience really, or you stay and you just go, you know what, this is much bigger than I ever thought, and I start giving in, and I did start giving in a big way in that place.
And then beautiful things happen, magical things, unexpected things. They're just small things, or I don't know, just something
surviving.
Surviving.
Surviving. Just
a certain fullness of heart.
Unbelievable.
And grace.
I was. I'm just speechless when it comes to that. So maybe we'll talk again. Well, we will talk again, but we'll talk again about India or something. We'll see.
Perhaps.
We'll see how it goes. But that really for me was a very beautiful conversation, and I hope that other people were equally as interested and captivated by your story, which is very very beautiful, very beautiful.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think we're gonna shut up shop. We're going to go downstairs to the kitchen, see what happens. And please share this if you're moved to. Subscribe if you can. I'm not sure what you're listening or watching it on. And thank you very much for being with us and tolerating us while we voyage around inside AMODA'S life. Be well. Any final words, Amoda? Is there anything I've missed out? I don't think so.
Thank you for listening. Not you, well, the others.
I haven't got any choice. All right. Many blessings to each one of your hearts, and many blessings to you, Amoda, and we'll see you soon.